All right, great. Thanks very much. Yeah, so I just want to talk about the data generated by the radar data generated by the Mini-RF instrument on LRO. I'm following up from what Maria gave a little preview for a few minutes ago, and also draw people's attention to complementary data by our colleagues at DFSAR on Chandrayaan-2. So I'm going to start by talking about why radar data is important for landing site selection. And then go over the data sets that are available and data collection that's ongoing before going through a handful of the sites. And that's not going to be because we're proposing or proponents of those particular sites, but just to give you an example of what the data sets look like. So the next slide, please. Great. Okay, so there's been a long heritage in the use of radar data for landing site selection ever since the beginning of planetary missions. And this is because it's hugely beneficial for engineering and safety constraints. Largely, radar will tell you information about the surface roughness, and from that you can get information about surface rocks distributions, and also really importantly, subsurface rock distributions. And this is critical because any sort of landed mission, the sort of descent thrusters, the plume will highly modify the regolith. This will be, especially so for the sort of architecture and the scales we're talking about for Artemis. And so knowledge of subsurface blocking material will be important from safety. Radar reflectivity is also important as well. A lot of landed missions have used radar descent altimeters, and so you need to be able to show you have adequate reflection in order to get accurate information on your descent, which is very critical to the safety of that. And so it's been used a lot by the Mars program for selecting sites for the rovers and the InSight mission. And I know it's probably sacrilege showing a bit of Mars data here in a lunar workshop, but nevertheless, I just want to show you this example on the right. This is from the InSight selection, which is using Arecibo 12.6 centimeter wavelength. This is kilometer scales because transmitted from Earth, but nevertheless, it was hugely beneficial. Here, the aim was to find a location that was volcanic, but was older, so it had a regolith so that they could deploy the thermal probe. And so from looking at the surface roughness here, you could see the bright, rough areas. You could distinguish those young volcanics from older ones that have a regolith layer. You could also kind of see these streaks of rough terrain, which is due to older but still rough lava flows, which were not so easily apparent in the image data and so critical for selecting the landing site there. And as all these missions landed correctly, you can say thanks radar. It's a very useful data set and should absolutely be used for Artemis. And so next slide, please. Right, so radar provides a wealth of information, and you can go in for hours and hours of explanation of it. But in a nutshell, what it's showing us is scattering from scatterers both in the surface and within the probing depth of the radar wavelength in question. We have multiple wavelengths available to us from the two missions we're talking about, down from 4.2 centimeters up to 24 centimeters. And so for each wavelength, they'll be sensitive to different scattering diameters, but they'll also probe different depths, with the longer wavelengths probing deeper into the subsurface. So the real key here is integrating all of these data sets together to give us an idea of the breakdown on the subsurface structure of the regolith itself, which is obviously hugely important from a range of science questions, also important from landing site safety as well. And the transmission of the radar signal through the regolith as well can tell us information about composition from the loss properties and dielectric information and density, and also including trying to isolate volatiles, for example, buried at depth. Also, what's important for Artemis is at these high latitudes where you have this kind of really extreme illumination. Radar generates its own radiation. It's not relying on the sun, and so we can get really nice data sets across these regions and not affected by such effects. Next slide, please. Okay, so the first one we'll talk about is Mini-RF radar, which is currently operating on LRO. It was designed as a monostatic. What I mean by that is it both transmits and receives from the same instrument on the spacecraft. And it did that for several years, both at 12.6 centimeters and at, back one, there we go, great, and at 4.2 centimeters. Unfortunately, back over a decade ago, the transmitter failed, and so the spacecraft has entered a bistatic sort of arrangement where we transmit from the Earth. We used to use Arecibo. Unfortunately, that of course has also failed for S-band, but we also currently using Goldstone in California for X-band transmissions, which we receive at LRO, which are really important because they tell us stuff about the sort of roughness at the smallest wavelengths. We have a spatial resolution from like 30 to 150 meters across the range of data sets I'll be showing us, which is really great for the sort of landing site analysis. And of course, there's also polarization information as well from the spacecraft, which is important for a lot of the data sets I'll be showing. Next question, please. Next slide, please. Right, and as for DFSAR, that's currently on board the Chandrayaan-2 spacecraft. This is also a monostatic system. But what's really crucial here that I want to highlight is the fact it also transmits the longer L band or the 24 centimeter wavelength. And so it gives us a nice characterization between that longer wavelength and then the X band at the centimeter scale to really make these gather information about the upper regolith and the surface of these landing sites. Also has a spatial resolution from 2 to 75 meters as well, and also provides data in various polarizations as well to give us these. We can make the data sets look at various properties of the near surface. Next slide, please. Okay, so looking first at mini-RF, here on the left is all of the 13 landing sites that are in consideration currently. See from the S-band monostatic data, we have near coverage of this region, hitting every one of the 13 sites with only a handful of them then slightly affected by not full coverage. And X-band, we've got coverage of most of the outer ones at the lower latitudes there, but not full coverage near the pole. But on the next slide, we will see the bistatic coverage that we also have. And at S-band, that's allowed us to fill up in all these gaps that we have. And at X-band, we've also, which is currently ongoing, and we'll continue targeting that as lunar librations allow, and providing the ground stations are all working nicely, we can start to fill in those zones as well to provide us more information at that lower wavelength. And if we change to the next slide, we'll see the DFSAR coverage here. And here on the left, the mission here has been concentrating on the polar regions. No surprises. So we've got really nice coverage here across the South Polar region. On the right, this looks for L-band data in particular, but looking at L-band data at a single look angle of 26 degrees in CC. It's not full coverage there of the whole region, but they're currently filling it in as we speak. And this also shows a mosaic of CPR, or circular polarization ratio. This is one of the products that we've able to generate from the polarization data we can get from both of the instruments. And here what this shows is an emphasis on surface or near surface roughness, with the warmer colors being rougher and the colder colors here being smoother. So from a landing site, you probably want to land somewhere where it's cooler, but from a sampling strategy and understanding near surface structure, you'll be interested also in these warmer pixels as well. The next slide, please. Okay, so now we're going to take a look through a selection of some of these zones. So the Malpet Massif here on the left is a lovely load of data we have from this region. In the center here is a east-looking mini-RF S-band. So this is a 12.6 centimeter CPR data. You can get this from QuickMap, and invite you all to look at this for the regions. But one of the works we've been doing more recently in a team, this has been led by Caleb Fassett, and I invite you all to take a look at his abstract from the last LPSC, is to correct for instance angles. Now, the instance angles we show are kept over a kind of fine range when we were collecting this data, but the CPR value is a function of not only near surface properties, but also the instance angles. That's why we try to keep these kind of fixed and near look angles. But of course, topography will influence what the local instance angles look like, which as a result can modulate the CPR data. And as you can see from this middle panel here, the slopes of this particular landing site is influencing. You've got these kind of higher CPRs due to slope effects. So the image on the right is essentially normalizing and correcting from those. And what you're left with the CPR that's largely related to the properties that we're interested in. If we look at the next slide, we'll see a kind of a more enhanced stretch in the CPR, not just from 0 to unity, which most of the images I'll show at. And it really highlights that especially the craters themselves seem to have these high CPR, and this is because the ejector is generated blocky material. You also have material within the craters themselves due to mass wasting. Next slide, please. We'll show also DFSAR on this as well, which is L-band, which is that longer 24 centimeter wavelength. We haven't corrected for the instance angles here, but nevertheless, you can see that the impact craters also show high CPR, and so you can compare the two data sets there to get a better handle on what's going on in the near surface. And next slide, please. We'll be moving on to Ostini Rimay site. What's really neat here is you've got this downslope direction towards the top right here of this of the box, and so you can see at both the S band, the shorter wavelength S band, and the longer wavelength L band. You can see high CPR, not just related around this crater in the middle here, but also going down slope. And we believe this is a result of mass wasting processes, probably slumping, which is excavated rocky material in the near surface, and even without the slope correction here on the monostatic data, on the DFSAR monostatic data, you can still make out these mass wasting processes. Also, what's neat is if you compare that sort of central larger impact crater in the two data sets, you can see the ejecta looks slightly more continuous at the shorter wavelength data in the center relative to the right. But my big compare too, we're really getting a sort of understanding on the sort of three-dimensional structure of the ejecta there, and so that could really sort of help sampling strategies and looking for different blocky material that you might want to bring back to Earth. Next slide, please. Right, and then here we're looking at the Glacier 2, or however you want to pronounce it. You see what's one of the most prominent features in this region is the Bait Thrust Fault. That's sort of the northern, I should say, towards the top of the box here. What's really neat about this is that you can see that's quite has a high CPR. It's probably very blocky, both in the near surface. You can see that both at the S band and at the L band data, which could perhaps provide further constraints on how these features form. I believe Tom Waters will be talking about these kind of features in either today or tomorrow. And so this might help educate us on how this could affect sort of the sort of seismic environment for this region as well. So this is certainly worth looking at too in more detail. And then on the next slide, please. The last zone I'm gonna concentrate on here, and Hayworth. And so here it's kind of the sort of rolling topography here. You see most of the CPR on the instance corrected is just associated with the impact craters. But once again, if you compare the long wavelength, the shorter wavelength, this could perhaps give us an indication on the maturity of these individual craters, for example. And so you could use that to sort of build up a sort of local stratigraphy, which could be really important for sampling and for devising traverses. So yeah, once again, there's just a lot of different applications for this data. I'd really want to invite you all to use it. On the final slide here, we'll provide a table, which is a summary of all the data that we have for the various sides. Sorry, the next slide. Yeah, here we go. So it shows the 13 sites. It shows the various wavelengths and shows whether we have complete or partial coverage. And also bearing in mind that the final column there, the bistatic, the 4.2 centimeter, we can still collect that data, and we'll continue to target the zones whenever we get an opportunity. So please, if you have any questions or interest, reach out to myself or anyone else on the MiniRAF team. We would love to help you out and really use this data set to drive the science and landing site constraints. And thanks very much.
Yeah, thank you, Gareth. It's really great. I love some of the new data products that are coming out. They're really amazing.